July 29th comes and goes. For most people, it passes like any other Wednesday, any other Thursday, any unremarkable day with no particular weight to it. But there is something Saint Martha does on that day for the souls of those who have already left this world. Something she does on no other day of the year. Something that Saint Teresa of Jesus spelled out with a clarity that still stops readers cold, completely still, staring at the page. And the majority of Catholics who know Saint Martha, who call on her, who keep her image in the kitchen, let July 29th pass without knowing it, without asking, without receiving what was there for the taking. What is lost that day does not come back until the following year. Martha of Bethany received something from Christ in this life that no other disciple received on that day in that place. He said it to her, only to her, before anyone else could hear, before they reached Lazarus's tomb. And the word Christ entrusted to Martha on the road to Bethany is the exact root of what she does on July 29th for the soul of your departed loved one. Saint Teresa of Jesus understood this. She wrote it down, and she warned us about something very specific, something very few people have ever taken seriously about that day. Write the name of your departed loved one in the comments below, just their name. Because what Saint Martha does for that soul on her feast day was set aside for you in this very moment, and every part of what follows depends on what came before it. Saint Martha is not a minor saint. She is not a decorative figure who appears in one episode of the Gospel and then vanishes. The Church has dedicated a feast to her July 29th for centuries, not out of habit, for a reason. Because Martha of Bethany held a place in the life of Christ that no other woman in the Gospels held in quite the same way. And that place has direct consequences for those who have lost someone and carry that weight with them every day. To understand what Saint Martha does on July 29th for the departed, you first have to understand who Martha really was. Who she was beyond the simplified image most people carry in their heads. The one who cooked while her sister Mary sat and listened to Jesus. That summary exists. It is in the Gospel of Luke. But stopping there is like reading the first page of a book and thinking you already know the story. Martha lived in Bethany, a small village less than 2 miles from Jerusalem on the far side of the Mount of Olives. She lived with her sister Mary and her brother Lazarus. The three of them were friends of Christ. The Gospel of John says it with a plainness that is itself a declaration. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. That verb, love, appears very few times in the Gospels in reference to specific people by name. It appears here. That says something about the place this family held in Christ's life. Martha ran the household. She received guests, prepared the meals, kept everything in order. In a society where the home was the responsibility of the eldest woman, Martha carried the weight of it all. And that service, that constant quiet work, was what led her one day to interrupt Christ and tell him her sister had left her to manage everything alone. That was the episode the Church has carried in its memory ever since. The moment Christ told her that Mary had chosen the better part. Saint Teresa of Jesus read that episode with a depth that has no equal in Spanish mystical literature. In the way of perfection, she does not place Martha below Mary. What she does is far more nuanced, more fair, and more revealing. She points out that the active life and the contemplative life are not two categories of unequal value, but two ways of loving God that can exist together in the same soul. Martha loved through service. Mary loved through stillness. Christ loved them both. But there is something else in Teresa's reading of Martha that most people miss. Saint Teresa of Jesus spent decades organizing foundations, traveling the roads of Castile and Andalusia, negotiating with bishops and noblemen, building convents from the ground up, an active life, physical, exhausting. And in that active life, She found her model not in the great contemplative figures, but in Martha, the one who kept working without stopping and went on believing, the one with her hands in the bread dough, literally, and her heart fixed on Christ. That identification, Saint Teresa with Martha, is the key to why she speaks of her when she writes about intercession, because intercession for Saint Teresa of Jesus had two equally valid forms: the soul that gathers itself in silence and waits, and the soul that plants itself before God with someone's name on its lips and stays there until an answer comes. Both arrive, both matter. Martha is the second. And Martha, across the whole of the gospel story, is the clearest example of that second form of intercession. The Church recognized it. The earliest Christian communities already had a devotion to Martha. Her veneration spread throughout the Mediterranean world. In the south of France, there is an ancient tradition recorded in medieval texts that Martha came to Provence after the death and resurrection of Christ, alongside her siblings and several other disciples, and that she spent decades evangelizing that region. She lived there until she died. She preached. She converted people. She built communities of faith in territory no one else had reached yet. The legend of the Tarasque, the dragon Martha reportedly tamed through faith and holy water in the town of Tarascon, speaks of a saint who walks straight toward danger, who goes out to meet whatever frightens everyone else with nothing in her hands but her faith in Christ and her certainty that death has already been defeated. She moves toward the problem, open-handed and clear-voiced, while others back away. That image of Martha, taming what terrifies, bringing calm where others bring distance, crossed the centuries and arrived intact in the tradition of the Church. That is the Martha the Church has preserved, honored, and venerated from the first century to this one. And it is the Martha Saint Teresa of Jesus had in mind when she wrote about her. A saint who serves, who presses forward, who believes, who acts. A saint who already knows what it is to lose someone she loved, and who for that reason does something on July 29th for the departed that is rooted in her own history of grief and faith. What happened in Bethany that gave Martha that singular authority over death, that comes now. Because what took place on that road, in that conversation before they reached the tomb, is the center of everything Saint Martha does for your departed loved one on July 29th. 4 days. That was how long Lazarus had been dead when Christ approached Bethany. 4 days is a long time. In the Jewish tradition of the first century, it was believed that the soul remained near the body for the first 3 days after death, hovering close to the place where it had lived, not yet fully gone. On the 4th day, the soul departed for good. The body began its visible decomposition. Death was now total, irreversible, beyond any natural remedy. Martha knew this. She knew it with the precise, painful knowledge of someone who had spent 4 days watching over a body, receiving condolence visits, hearing the same comforting words repeated until they emptied of meaning with every passing hour. She knew it with the exhaustion of someone who had cried until there were no more tears and was still standing because there was no other choice. Because someone had to keep standing. If she went down, everything went down. When word came that Christ was on the road, Martha did not wait. She went out alone. Mary stayed in the house, seated, surrounded by the women who had come to mourn with them. That is what the Gospel of John says in chapter 11. Mary stayed. Martha went out. And that small detail, that single movement, says everything about who Martha was and how she understood grief and faith. Going out is an act of faith before it is an act of legs. When grief is crushing, what the body wants is to stay still. Stay where it is, curl inward, close the doors. Martha did the opposite. She went out onto the road. She went toward Christ. And she did not go with a prepared speech or a carefully worded petition. She went with the most unvarnished truth she had inside her. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That sentence is the most honest prayer in the gospel. It carries everything grief does to a person of faith. The certainty that Christ had the power to prevent it. The unanswered question of why he did not. The weight of a loss that no explanation can fully reach. Martha does not say this in anger. She says it with the voice of someone who trusts, who has trusted for years, and who in this moment needs that trust to find something solid to hold on to. Christ listened. He let her speak. And instead of explaining the delay, he answered her with something none of those present expected to hear on that road, on that dusty path, in front of a woman with eyes swollen from 4 days of weeping. Your brother will rise again. Martha knew the doctrine. She said what any devout Jew of her time would have said. I know he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. That is faith, correct faith, well learned, well held. But Christ went further. He went exactly as far as he could go. I am the resurrection and the life. 5 words that hold everything. Christ did not tell Martha that the resurrection was a future event that would happen someday far off. He told her that the resurrection was him, that life was him, that wherever he was, death was no longer the final word. And he said it to her, to Martha, to the one who had come out onto the road with a broken heart and her faith still intact. Then he asked her a question, just one. And that question is what opens everything that follows. Do you believe this? Martha answered. And what she said is something the church has been repeating for 20 centuries because it has never found anything more complete. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world. That confession of faith, spoken before Lazarus walked out of the tomb, before she had seen any miracle, before there was a single visible proof of what she had just heard, is the most complete declaration of faith in the Gospel of John before the Passion. Martha believed first. Lazarus came out afterward. That order matters. That order is the structure of all intercession. First, someone believes. First, someone goes out onto the road, moves toward Christ, speaks the truth of their grief, hears his answer, and responds with faith. Then what has to happen, happens. And there is something Christ said to Martha on that road that has everything to do with what you feel when you think about the soul of your departed loved one. Something most people never quite see because they stop at the visible miracle, Lazarus walking out of the tomb, and do not listen to what happened before. On that road between Christ and Martha, before anyone else came near, Christ chose that road. He chose that encounter. He could have gone straight to the tomb. He stopped. He waited for Martha to reach him. And in that space between the two of them, on that stretch of dusty ground, something happened that changed Martha's relationship with death forever. Christ entrusted something to her that day that still carries weight today, still works today, still reaches the souls who are waiting. That trust Christ placed in Martha continued. It accompanied her in her preaching in Provence, if the tradition holds. It sustained her every time she spoke of the resurrection to people who had never seen anyone raised from the dead. And when Martha died and her soul entered the presence of God, that trust did not stay behind on earth. It went with her. That is why what St. Martha does on July 29th for the departed has a route that goes straight back to that road, to the words Christ spoke to her before they reached the tomb. Saint Teresa of Jesus saw this, and what she warned us about concerning Martha's particular gift is what we need to understand in order to know what is lost when July 29th passes without anyone asking. There is a question Saint Teresa of Avila returned to many times across her life, one she recorded in various forms throughout her writings. A question about why some saints intercede for the living and the departed with an effectiveness that other saints also have, but in a different way. What makes the intercession of a particular saint arrive with a particular weight? What the history of that saint, what they lived, what they suffered, what they received from God, has to do with the way they carry the intentions of those who ask. Saint Teresa of Avila spent decades thinking about this, not as an academic exercise, as a living need. She was founding convents, choosing which saints to entrust each situation to, aware that intercession worked differently depending on the saint and the circumstance. And through that experience, she gradually learned something that has been nearly forgotten today, that the intercession of the saints is shaped by what those saints themselves passed through. That a saint who suffered the loss of someone beloved has a way of bringing that grief before God that is different from the way of a saint who never experienced it, because that saint knows from the inside what it weighs to lose someone, knows the exact heaviness of those days when the silence of heaven seems total, knows how hard it is to keep believing when the body you loved is already in the ground and all you have left is faith and the effort of getting up each morning. Saint Martha lost her brother. She watched him die. She spent 4 days keeping vigil over that death, and then she watched him walk out of the tomb alive. Martha has something very few saints have, the full experience of the grief of loss, followed by the direct experience of Christ giving back what death had taken. That complete arc, grief and resurrection, is what Martha carries with her before the throne of God when she intercedes for the departed. Saint Teresa of Avila understood it that way. In The Way of Perfection, when she writes about the prayer of petition and the intercession of the saints, she points out that the saints who intercede most effectively are those who lived in their own flesh what the person asking is living now, because that correspondence between the grief of the one asking and the grief the saint already knows creates a bond of understanding that prayer travels faster across. The saint does not need to understand from the outside what you are suffering. She already knows it from the inside. Martha knows what it is to wait 4 days with a shattered heart. She knows what it is to stay on your feet when everything says there is nothing left to do. She knows what it is to go out onto the road when every part of you wants to stay still, when the condolence visitors have gone home and the house has gone quiet and the silence weighs more than anything anyone said to comfort you. And she knows what it is to hear Christ say something that changes everything before seeing any proof that what he said is true. That is what Martha carries. That is what she sets before God when she intercedes on July 29th for the soul of someone who has died. July 29th is her feast. The Church set it there centuries ago, and the feast of a saint in the doctrine Saint Teresa of Avila taught and lived is not an empty anniversary. It is the day when that saint's intercession carries a particular weight, a specific gravity, as if the grace of what that saint lived and received from God becomes more available to those who approach it in faith at that precise moment in the liturgical year. Saint Teresa of Avila was very direct about this, and what she said is important not to pass over lightly. In her writings on the feasts of the saints, she stated that the devout person who lets a feast day go by without approaching that saint is letting something go by that will not be available again until the following year. Not as a threat, as a description of how time works in the spiritual life. Feasts are thresholds, windows that open and then close. The person who is paying attention walks through them. The one who is not watches them pass from a distance. And on July 29th, the window that opens belongs to a saint who stood on the road to Bethany, who heard Christ tell her he was the resurrection and the life, who answered with the most complete declaration of faith in the gospel before the Passion, who watched her brother come out of the tomb wrapped in burial cloths and walk into the light. That saint, on the day of her feast, carries the names of the departed before the same Christ who gave her that revelation on the road. And what she says to him is not a new or hastily assembled petition. It is a memory. It is, "Lord, you told me you are the resurrection and the life." This is the soul of someone a person on earth has not forgotten. And I know, because I lived it, that you give back what death takes away. The question that remains open, the one Saint Teresa of Avila raised and that still has an answer today, is this. What exactly does Martha do with that intercession on July 29th? How does it reach the soul of the departed? What does she need from you so that bridge is completed? Because intercession, according to what Saint Teresa of Avila left written with considerable precision, has two ends. One end is in heaven, where the saint intercedes. The other end is here, on earth, where someone has to move, has to do something, so that grace finds somewhere to land. What that something is exactly. What Saint Teresa of Avila identified as what the devout person must do on July 29th for the intercession of Saint Martha to reach their departed loved one with full force. That comes now. 2 days before Lazarus fell ill, based on what the Gospel allows us to reconstruct, Martha was doing what she always did, preparing the house, receiving whoever came, making sure everything was in order. Service was her way of being in the world, her form of love. And then ordinary life stopped. Her brother fell ill. They sent word to Christ, and Christ did not come. The days that followed, the days of waiting while Lazarus worsened and then while he died, are the days Martha knows better than any other person in the Gospels. The days of believing without seeing, waiting with no sign, staying on your feet with a broken heart, while the house filled with visitors who came to weep with them and then left, and the weight of everything settled back down. Days when the question of why Christ had not come must have ached with an intensity that the neighbor's kind words could not touch. Days when faith has nothing visible holding it up, only what you decided to believe long before the pain arrived. When Christ finally came, 4 days after Lazarus died, it was Martha he revealed himself to first, before Mary, before the crowd. To Martha, the one who had gone out onto the road to meet him, who arrived with the truth on her lips and her faith still intact beneath the grief. And what Christ said to her is worth pausing over, because it is the key to everything Saint Teresa of Avila understood about this saint's intercession. Christ said to her, "The one who believes in me, even though he dies, will live. And whoever lives and believes in me will never truly die." Then he asked her, "Do you believe this?" It was not a rhetorical question. Christ wanted an answer. He was waiting for it. And what Martha gave him is something Saint Teresa of Avila studied for years and marked in the way of perfection as the model of faith that acts before it sees. Martha answered, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into this world." That sentence, spoken in that moment without having yet seen any miracle, without knowing what would happen in the minutes to come, is one of the most absolute declarations of faith in the entire New Testament. Martha did not make her faith conditional on proof. She believed first, then saw. That is the order Saint Teresa of Avila identified as the only possible order for anyone who wants prayer to arrive where it needs to go. In The Way of Perfection, Saint Teresa of Avila wrote about the necessity of praying with faith before seeing the result, not after. She pointed out that the most common error of the devout is to wait for certainty before believing with full force. That this inverts the order, that the faith that moves mountains, the faith Christ praised in the Gospel again and again, is the faith that speaks before anything visible supports it. The faith of the one who says yes even though the tomb is still sealed. And she added something that takes the breath away. That this kind of faith is the language God recognizes before any other. That when the soul prays from that place, from certainty without proof, the prayer arrives differently, more directly, more cleanly. without the weight of doubt slowing it down halfway. Martha prayed that way, and Lazarus came out. That moment, Lazarus appearing at the entrance of the tomb, still wrapped in burial cloths, the whole village watching in silence, is the moment Martha carries with her forever. She witnessed the resurrection of someone she loved with her own eyes in a village 2 miles from Jerusalem on an ordinary afternoon that became the center of her history. And that experience, that certainty acquired not through reasoning but through living it, is what sustains her intercession on July 29th for the souls that have not yet arrived at the final resurrection. There is something Saint Teresa of Avila warned about this day that most devotees of Saint Martha do not know. She said it in her letters and in certain passages of the book of her life, when she wrote about the way saints intercede with greater force on the day of their feast than at any other point in the year. She said that on that day, the saint not only can do more, but wants to do more. That there is something in the liturgical feast that awakens in the saint a particular readiness toward those who come to ask. As if the whole church praying that saint's name on that day lights something in heaven that the rest of the year is only embers. And what Saint Martha wants on July 29th, what she brings before the throne of God with an intensity that multiplies on that day, are the names of the departed that someone on earth still remembers. The ones someone has not forgotten. The ones someone still weeps for. Because Martha knows what that is. She knows the weight of a love that does not end just because the person is gone, and she carries it for what it is, the most honest prayer that exists. On July 29th, Martha is standing as she stood on the road to Bethany with the same readiness as always, ready to go to Christ, ready to say on behalf of your departed loved one what she said on behalf of Lazarus. And what Christ answers Martha on the day of her feast, when she carries the name you wrote down, is the same answer he gave her that afternoon on the dusty road. The same. Because Christ does not change. He never has. Why July 29th and not any other day of the year? That question has an answer the Church has upheld since its earliest centuries. One Saint Teresa of Avila articulated with a precision that is still difficult to improve on. To understand it, you first have to understand how time works in the spiritual life. Because liturgical time does not work like calendar time. July 29th on the almanac is just a date. July 29th in the liturgical years is something else entirely. The Church did not place the feasts of the saints there as historical reminders. She placed them there as thresholds, as moments when the grace a saint lived, received, and transmitted in life becomes especially available to those who approach it in faith. The saints in heaven exist outside time as we know it, but the Church on earth is inside time and needs points of contact, moments when the veil between the visible and the invisible grows thinner. The liturgical feasts are those moments. The Church has always known this. The martyrs of the early centuries were honored on the anniversary of their death, which was also the day of their birth into heaven. Ever since, every liturgical feast has been a node of grace on the calendar, a point where heaven and earth draw closer than usual, and the souls who are waiting receive what the living send them more readily than at any other moment of the year. Saint Teresa of Avila understood it this way, and said so in words that those who have read them rarely forget. In her correspondence with various people who consulted her about prayer, she noted that feast days are days when the saint's readiness toward those who ask is greater. Not because the saint is asleep the rest of the year, but because the love of the Church that day, naming that saint, singing to that saint, offering the Mass in that saint's honor, awakens in that glorified heart a response of love that pours itself out on those who come forward with their intentions. That exchange, the devotion of the Church on earth and the intercession of the saints in heaven, is what the doctrine calls the communion of saints. and the communion of saints is not an abstract concept confined to theology textbooks. It is a living reality with practical consequences for the devout person who knows how to move within it. On July 29th, the communion of saints has a specific node, Saint Martha. The Church on earth speaks her name, offers the Eucharist, asks her intercession. And Saint Martha in heaven brings those petitions before Christ with the intensity proper to that day. The souls in purgatory, who are also part of the communion of saints, though in a state of purification, receive the benefit of that intercession when someone on earth has asked for it in their name. Those souls are waiting for someone here to remember that July 29th is Saint Martha's Day. For someone to know that on that day, the door is wide open, and all it takes is walking through it with the name of the departed in their heart and saying it to her. For someone to do what Martha did on the road to Bethany, go out, move, go toward Christ with the truth of their grief and the name of the one who left. There is the key to what Saint Teresa of Avila warned about. If no one asks, Martha's intercession on that day does not disappear. She goes on interceding for the whole church with her usual love. But there is a difference between the general intercession a saint offers the whole church and the specific intercession that saint carries for a particular soul when someone on earth has entrusted that soul to her by name, with a history, with love, with the real weight of a grief that has not finished. The first is like rain that falls on everything. The second is like water someone cups in their hands and carries to where it is needed. Both come from the same source, but they arrive differently. And the grace that someone asked for a particular soul reaches that soul differently from the grace that arrived without anyone naming them. Saint Teresa of Avila was clear about this, with the direct plainness that defined her. Prayer for the departed requires that someone pray it. The souls in purgatory depend on the living. Not because God cannot act without intermediaries, but because that is how He chose it in His providence, that the living and the departed would be joined in a bond of active love where each prays for the other. That bond does not activate on its own. Someone has to light it. July 29th is the day when lighting that bond through Saint Martha carries a specific weight that no other day of the year carries. A weight born from this saint's history, from what she lived in Bethany, from what Christ said to her on that road, from what she answered before seeing anything. A weight Saint Teresa of Avila recognized and warned us about, with an urgency that, read slowly, still moves something in the chest and makes it clear that something has to be done, that someone has to move before the day is over. What Saint Teresa of Avila warned must not be left undone on July 29th comes now. With all the clarity this saint deserves, and with the precision the soul of your departed loved one needs from you. In the summer of 1562, Saint Teresa of Avila was finishing The Way of Perfection at the convent of Saint Joseph in Avila, the first house of her reform. She had been writing for months for her nuns, explaining how to pray, how to understand the prayer of petition, how to approach God from trust rather than fear. And in that context, when she speaks of intercession for the departed, what she says does not sound like theory. It sounds like someone who has been there, who has tried it, who knows what she is talking about. Saint Teresa of Avila had lost her mother at the age of 12. Then she lost her father, whom she loved deeply, and whose death affected her in a way she described in the book of her life with an honesty that still moves readers today. Through her religious life, she kept losing people, sisters in the convent, spiritual friends, people who had walked alongside her in the Carmelite reform. She knew grief. She knew what it was to pray for someone who was no longer there. And from that experience, from the knowledge that comes from having wept and kept praying, she wrote about intercession for the departed with an authority that those who approach the subject only through theory do not have. What Saint Teresa of Avila says about the departed is not what a theologian works out at a desk. It is what a woman who has buried the people she loved has learned in prayer and in pain. on the devotion to saints and their particular power on the day of their feast, Saint Teresa of Avila was very precise. She said that letting a saint's feast day go by without seeking their intercession is a lapse with real consequences. The saint does not take offense. But the devout person loses something that was available that day with a particular generosity, something that will not be available in the same way until the following year. It is worth pausing on that idea for a moment, because it is the one that meets the most resistance from people who hear it for the first time. The idea that grace is more available on certain days than others can sound unfair, as if God were more generous at certain times of year than at others. But that is not what Saint Teresa of Avila taught. What she taught is that God is always available, but that the Church, in her liturgical wisdom, has created moments of concentrated attention and love from the faithful people, and that this concentration of love and prayer creates particular conditions for receiving what God always wanted to give. Think of a river that always flows and a sluice gate that opens. The water is the same. The source is the same. But when the gate opens, what reaches the field is greater. It arrives with more force. It arrives at the moment the field needs it most. The person who is there when the gate opens receives what the one who came late can no longer receive in the same way. July 29th is St. Martha's Gate, and the historical devotion to this saint for the departed has roots that go much further back than most people imagine. In the Christian communities of the early centuries, when death was a daily presence and cemeteries sat within city walls, Saint Martha was honored in a special way as intercessor for those who had departed. The women who prepared bodies for burial, who washed and anointed the dead, as Martha would have prepared Lazarus before Christ called him back, invoked her in a particular way, because Martha had witnessed something these women needed to believe with everything in them, that death does not have the final word. That ancient devotion, that custom of bringing a departed loved one's name to Saint Martha on July 29th, reached the communities of the Spanish-speaking world through centuries of faith passed from grandmother to granddaughter, from mother to daughter, from one generation of women to the next. Women who knew that day was different, that on that day a candle had to be lit, a name had to be spoken aloud, and Saint Martha had to be asked to carry that soul before Christ with the same confidence she brought to the road at Bethany. Saint Teresa of Avila knew that tradition and recognized it as true. She recognized it because it fit with what she herself had learned in prayer about how the intercession of the saints works and why liturgical feast days carry a weight that ordinary days do not. And from that intersection between the ancient tradition and the mystical understanding of Saint Teresa of Avila, something was born that can still change everything for the soul of your departed loved one today, if you know what to do with it. There is something Saint Teresa of Avila pointed to specifically about this day that most devotees of Saint Martha miss entirely. Something that has to do with what the devout person actually does, with what they bring from their end of the connection, with what falls to them in that collaboration between heaven and earth that is intercession. Because intercession for Saint Teresa of Avila was never a passive act. There was always a movement on the part of the one asking, an active readiness, a concrete effort that gets set in motion here on earth before anything moves up in heaven. What that effort is exactly, what Saint Teresa of Avila identified as what the devout person must do on July 29th, so that Saint Martha's intercession reaches their departed loved one with full force, that comes now. When Saint Teresa of Avila speaks of what the devout person must do at the feast of a saint, so that intercession reaches the departed, what she describes is simple, accessible to any Catholic, with no special training, no complicated rituals. She speaks of three concrete things that, combined on July 29th, create what she described in her own words in The Way of Perfection, as the conditions most favorable for grace to reach those who need it most. The first is the Mass. Saint Teresa of Avila was absolutely consistent about this across her entire life and all her writings. The Mass is the most powerful act a living person can offer for a departed soul. The Church has taught it since her earliest centuries, and Saint Teresa of Avila repeated it with a conviction born of having confirmed it in prayer. The Eucharist is the sacrifice of Christ made present, and that sacrifice carries an infinite value that is applied to the soul for whom it is offered in a way no other prayer can match. When Mass is celebrated on July 29th and the devout person offers it for their departed loved one, that offering reaches Saint Martha at the very moment her intercession is most active. It arrives as a specific petition, with a name, with a history, with the weight of a love that has not finished. Saint Teresa of Avila wrote something in the book of her life about the Mass for the departed that you do not forget once you have read it. She wrote that the souls in Purgatory feel the Mass offered for them in a way the living cannot understand from this side of death, that it reaches them like water reaching someone who has been hours in the summer heat. Real, immediate relief. Not the vague comfort of kind words, but something concrete and actual. The second thing is direct prayer to Saint Martha, spoken with the name of the departed. Say the name, speak it aloud if possible. Tell Saint Martha, carry this person before Christ the way you carry your grief to the road at Bethany, with the same confidence, with the same honesty, with the same faith that declared before it saw. That prayer does not need to be long or perfectly worded. Saint Teresa of Avila was always wary of prayers that stretch on, because the one praying believes more words mean more weight. What gives weight to prayer is the faith behind it, not the number of words around it. A single sentence spoken from the heart, with the name of the departed inside it, goes further than half an hour of words said without pausing to feel what is being asked. The name of your departed loved one, spoken before Saint Martha on July 29th, with faith, with love, with the quiet certainty that she hears it and takes it with her, is enough. It is what the soul of that person is waiting for from you on that day. The third thing is what Saint Teresa of Avila called an act of love offered. This is perhaps the least known element of Teresian spirituality in relation to the departed, and also the most beautiful. Saint Teresa of Avila taught that any act of service, any work of love carried out that day and consciously offered in the name of the departed, reaches that soul as a gift sent from earth. A glass of water given to someone who is thirsty, a visit to someone no one visits, a word of comfort said where it was needed and no one else was saying it. A small, concrete act of service offered that day with the name of the departed held in mind and in heart. The soul of the departed, Saint Teresa of Avila taught, can do nothing by itself in purgatory to advance toward God. It waits. In a state that theologians describe as purification, but that at its core is a waiting for love, a waiting for what someone on earth still chooses to do for it. And what moves it forward always comes from outside: the mercy of God, the intercession of the saints, and the active love of those still living. When that active love takes the form of an act of service, offered with clear intention in the name of the departed, the weight of that act reaches the soul in a real and genuine way. In one of her letters to her brother Lorenzo de Cepeda, Saint Teresa of Avila compared it to lighting a candle in a dark room. It does not change the size of the room, but it changes everything inside it. On July 29th, doing these three things for your departed loved one, the Mass, the prayer with their name, the act of love offered in their name, is doing what Martha did on the road to Bethany, going out, moving toward Christ, speaking the truth of the love you still carry, and trusting that He hears. That is what Saint Teresa of Avila warned must not be left undone that day. That is what is lost when July 29th goes by and no one did it. And there is one more thing. Something Saint Teresa of Avila left written as a kind of quiet promise, never quite framed as a promise. But anyone who reads it in context understands exactly what it means. Something about what the devout person receives in return when they do these 3 things for their departed loved one on July 29th. Not as payment, as the natural consequence of love that moves in both directions within the communion of saints. The last piece of all this comes now, and it is the one that changes the full and final meaning of everything you have just heard. In one of her best-known letters, written to her brother Lorenzo de Cepeda in January of 1577, Saint Teresa of Avila said something that might seem secondary at first glance, but that anyone who reads it carefully feels in their bones. She told him that when one prays for the departed with genuine love, it is not only the departed who receives. The one who prays receives something too. That the love that sets intercession in motion for someone who has already left has a way of returning to the one who sent it that no other form of prayer has in quite the same way. That is the quiet promise Saint Teresa of Avila left behind. Whoever prays for their departed loved one on July 29th with Saint Martha is not only making a gesture of love toward the one who is gone, they are also opening something in themselves, a channel, a readiness, an interior space that God fills with something very hard to put into words, but that anyone who has experienced it recognizes immediately, a peace that has no proportion to the circumstances of their life, a certainty that does not come from reasoning but from somewhere deeper, the quiet, steady sense that the departed loved one is well, that they are in God's hands, that what you did for them today arrived. Saint Teresa of Avila described that peace in the book of her life as one of the clearest signs that prayer has reached where it needed to go. She said that the soul that has truly prayed for its departed feels, before there is any visible evidence, that something has moved, that the prayer has completed its journey, that the love that went out from it has found its destination. That is what can happen on July 29th if you go to Saint Martha with your departed loved one's name. Saint Teresa of Avila was also very honest about something that people prefer not to hear. She said that the peace that comes from praying for the departed has a price, a small price, a manageable one, but real. The price is action, movement, going out onto the road the way Martha went out onto the road. Peace does not come to the person who waits in place, hoping something will shift without their doing anything. It comes to the person who moves, who decides that July 29th is a day when something concrete is going to happen on their part. Even if that something is small, even if it feels like too little against the weight of everything they are carrying. Saint Teresa of Avila was firm about this, leaving no room for excuses. God does not ask for perfection from the person who prays for their departed. He asks for movement. He asks that someone do something, that someone go out onto the road, go to Mass. Speak your departed loved one's name before Saint Martha. Offer an act of love in their name. 3 things, none of them impossible, none of them requiring a degree of holiness you do not have, just the decision to do them. Martha did not arrive on the road to Bethany because she felt ready. She arrived because she loved her brother, and Christ was coming and there was no time to think too carefully. Love moved her before her head could slow her down. And Christ heard her exactly like that. With the grief still raw, the words still rough-edged, the faith still without the polish of someone who has had time to arrange what they believe. Without having slept properly in 4 days, without having finished processing what she had lost, wearing mourning clothes with the dust of the road on her feet. Christ heard her just that way, answered her just that way. And the resurrection of Lazarus happened exactly like that, after a petition made from bare pain, from imperfect faith, from love that went out onto the road before it knew whether it was worth it. Saint Martha is going to do the same for your departed loved one on July 29th. With whatever love you bring, without asking more of you than you have right now, without asking you to be a different person than the one you are, carrying before Christ whatever you have inside. Even if it is small, even if you arrive unprepared in the way you thought you should be prepared. Because Martha knows there is no such thing as perfect preparation. There is only the road, and the road begins when someone decides to go. The story of Martha teaches something Saint Teresa of Avila said in many different ways across her whole life: that God prefers honest love to the perfect gesture, that a heart that goes out onto the road with what it has, with what it is, with what it can manage right now, matters more in the logic of the gospel than a heart that stays home waiting to feel ready. July 29th is here. Saint Martha is ready. Your departed loved one is waiting. What Saint Teresa of Avila warned about at the start of all this, what she said is lost when this day passes without anyone doing anything, now has a concrete name. What is lost is the moment when Martha could have carried that name before Christ with the intensity that only that day carries. The Mass that no one arranged, the act of love that no one offered. The peace that comes when someone does their part and leaves the rest in the hands of a saint who already knows how all of this works because she lived it in her own flesh on a dusty road 2 miles from Jerusalem. Those losses happen in silence, without visible drama. The day continues, life continues, and no one notices that something did not happen. But the soul of your departed loved one waits another year for someone to remember that July 29th was their moment. All of it can be here today if you decide it will be. You made it this far. That means something. It means there is a name you have not forgotten, a love that did not end the day that person died. Something inside you that knows the bond between the living and those who have already gone is real. That the faith you were taught when you were young carries a weight that still holds things up today that reason alone cannot hold. You got here because that love brought you. And that love, today, on July 29th, has somewhere to go. You also got here because the doubt whether what you do for your departed loved one actually arrives, whether prayer carries real weight or is only a gesture that comforts you without moving anything, that doubt brought you too. And what you found here today is not an answer that closes the question. It is something better, a certainty that transforms it. The question is no longer whether prayer arrives. The question now is when you are going to pray yours. Saint Martha is ready. She has been since before you started listening, since before you knew her full story, since before you understood why this day is different from the others. She was already ready. She already had your departed loved one's name in her heart, waiting for someone on earth to complete the bridge. Today, you completed it. What you received here is more than information. It is an orientation. The difference between knowing a door exists and knowing where it is and how it opens. Saint Teresa of Avila spent decades learning to move through the spiritual life with that kind of precision. She learned it in order to hand it on, so that whoever came after her would know how to do what she had learned to do. So that on July 29th of any given year, someone who loves a departed soul would know that this day carries a specific weight, that Saint Martha is ready, and that there are 3 concrete things they can do before the day is over. The Mass, the name spoken before Saint Martha, the act of love offered in the name of the departed, 3 things, today, before July 29th closes. If you have already done them, rest in that. What went out from you today arrived. Saint Martha carried it. Christ heard it. And your departed loved one received what you sent from this side of death with the love you still have and have not known what to do with since that person left. Today, it found somewhere to go. If you have not done them yet, there is still time. The day is not over. Martha is still on the road, and all that is needed is what she had at Bethany: to go, to move, to go toward Christ with what you have. Even if it is little, even if you arrive without the preparation you thought you needed, even if your heart is more tired than devout right now. She went like that. and Christ heard her like that. Saint Teresa of Avila wrote something in the Way of Perfection about what happens in the soul after a true prayer for the departed. She wrote that this kind of prayer leaves the one who prays it with something like lightness, which is not the same as indifference. Indifference is when it no longer matters. Lightness is when the weight is still real, but someone else is carrying it with you. When you feel that the love you have for that person is no longer something you carry alone, because you placed it in hands that know where to take it. That is what Saint Martha does on July 29th. She takes the weight of the love you do not know what to do with and carries it to where it belongs, to the feet of Christ, with the name of the one you love, with the same trust she carried to the road at Bethany. That weight you have borne since your loved one left, that love without a visible recipient, that tenderness with nowhere to go. Today, it had somewhere to go, and that is enough for today. The love you carry for your departed does not end today. It continues. And the spiritual life that tends that love, nourishes it, orients it toward where it can do good. That life has much more to give you. There are saints who intercede with different kinds of authority. There are seasons in the liturgical year that open different windows from the one that opens today. There are revelations from Saint Teresa of Avila about souls, about prayer, about how God works in the heart of the person who has never stopped loving their departed, that you have not yet heard, and that change the way you relate to what you believe. All of it is available. All of it can come to you if you keep looking. And looking in the spiritual life means exactly what Martha did on the road to Bethany, setting out before you know exactly where the road leads, trusting that what comes next was also prepared for you. Every time you return here, every time you let a voice accompany you on this road of faith that sometimes you walk in silence and alone, you are doing what Martha did, moving towards something you still believe in, even with the grief still there. That movement matters. It matters for you. It matters for your departed loved one. And what you find at each stop along the way carries the weight of what you are honestly searching for. Keep going because your departed loved one deserves that you keep going. Because the love you have for that person is the love most like intercession that exists. A love that crosses the distance between earth and heaven and arrives, one way or another, at the one it was meant for. Saint Teresa of Avila said it once, and those who read it have never shaken it loose. Love is never lost. It changes form with time and distance. It moves from visible presence to prayer, from prayer to intercession, from intercession to the grace that reaches the soul waiting on the other side. And with each change of form, love does not grow smaller. It grows deeper, freer, more like what it always wanted to be back when it was still held within the limits of a body and a lifetime. The love you have for your departed changed form the day that person died, but it did not leave. It has been here the whole time you have been listening, and today, on July 29th, it found a concrete way to reach where it belongs. May Saint Martha carry it. May Christ receive it. May the soul of your departed loved one feel today what you sent from here, from this side of death, with your heart in your hand and your faith still alive beneath the grief. That is what you asked Saint Martha to do today, and she will do it, because Martha knows how to go out onto the road when the road is what is needed, because Martha knows how to reach Christ before anyone else does, because Martha has already heard a petition made from the grief of losing someone, and Christ did not leave her without an answer. May the same Christ who answered Martha on the road to Bethany answer today on behalf of the soul of your departed loved one. And may you, who did your part today, rest in that, with the peace that comes from knowing that love acts even when you can no longer see where it goes. Until next time. With a grateful heart for having walked a stretch of this road alongside you today, a road that has no end, that goes always further in, always closer to what Saint Teresa of Avila called the seventh dwelling, the place where the soul and God are no longer searching for each other because they have already found each other. May God bless you and those you love. May Saint Martha intercede for you and for everyone you carry in your heart, the living and those who have already gone. May the name you spoke today arrive where it needs to arrive, and may the love you placed in that name return to you transformed into the peace Saint Teresa of Avila described as the clearest sign that prayer found its way and reached its destination. And may July 29th of this year be not just a date on the calendar, but the day something real happened for the soul of your departed loved one, because you decided that it would.